Welcome everyone to Zoom Palestine. A very eventful week. The week of today is January 13th, but we've had a number of very important events happening that we will discuss today. We had the International Court of Justice events sponsored where South Africa brought a case against Israel for genocide in Gaza. And we had the very significant and important B'Tselem, the Israeli peace group, where they issued a report on that Israel is deliberately starving Gaza. Of course, this is a total violation of Jewish ethics and principles. And I just found out from a friend that I'm being accused of being anti-Semitic in my building, and Jewish residents, some of them are spreading rumors about me that I've published swastika signs, all of which is not true. However, I think now any voice that speaks out in criticism of Israel is going to be threatened by many misguided people and attacked and hounded. So I just pray that God gives me the strength to put up with what I have to put up with here, because I try to be a voice for the suffering people of Palestine. And I'm going to write an article on why the current Israeli government is anti-Semitic, why Israel is now anti-Semitic, because it's violating Jewish laws and it's violating historic, compassionate Jewish ethics. Where historically Jews have been the compassionate, ethical people, guarding the rights of people, not violating them as it's going on today. So we'll start out with our usual video introduction movement music. My blood is Palestinian. Of the song, because we have a lot to cover today in the major events that are happening all week. So let me move this browser a bit out of the way. Okay, so the Electronic Intifada provides a very good summary of the week's events, and we're going to listen to some of their comments on it. They talk about how Netanyahu now is striking Lebanon to save his neck. He needs to be in war, constant war, to keep himself out of jail. So let's look a little bit at how Netanyahu strikes Lebanon to save his neck. As Israel desperately searches for victory in Gaza after 3 months, the potential for an expanded regional conflict increases. And this is, again, and we saw the news this morning that Joe Biden is recklessly bombing the Houthis. So we're going to go to war in Yemen next. We have to keep the military people, manufacturers of bombs and weapons, rich. So on January 2nd, Israeli airstrike in the heart of Beirut's southern suburb assassinated Sheikh Salah al-Aruri, He was the deputy head of Hamas's political leaders. And since then, the Israeli-Lebanon boundary has witnessed escalating clashes between Hezbollah and the military. Hezbollah and Hamas have had close relationships and have been pillars of what they call the axis of resistance. So the conflict has been going on for a long time. And the Dahia doctrine, the assassination of the heart of Dahia was a dangerous escalation and residents were shaken. Rhonda, who lives near the chartered building, which is what her last name knew, said only a few minutes earlier, my husband and I passed by the site. So people are starting to worry that this is going to be the beginning of a long siege against people, against Hezbollah, and people in Israel have been saying that they should make they should make Beirut look like Gaza. And the other thing is Israel is blocking aid and fuel to Gaza hospitals, and we're going to hear more about this later. Many human rights groups are reporting the extreme emergency, and some congressmen complained about Israeli not letting supplies in, and we'll hear from them in a few minutes. And new update: France's new foreign minister, who's Jewish, has enabled Gaza genocide in France. So Macron appointed this guy as foreign minister, and doesn't look good at all for France. Is more backing of France for Israel. Now we're going to listen to Day 96 roundup by Nora Barrows Friedman to catch us up on what's been going on.
Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifadas live stream for Wednesday, January 10th. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to all of our viewers and listeners. I'm Nora Barrows Friedman with my colleagues Asa Winstanley, John Elmer, Tamara Nassar, and Ali Abunima. It's day 96 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. We'll have a full news report coming up later in the program. Plus, we'll be joined by novelist Ahmed Massoud in London to talk about the latest situation with his family in Gaza. And of course, we'll have a discussion with John about the dynamics of resistance to the genocide. And we'll analyze the latest videos put out by Palestinian Defense Forces. But first, we take a look at the International Court of Justice. This week, the ICJ is set to hear a South African application under the Genocide Convention accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Should the application be accepted, the ICJ could issue a temporary injunction on Israel to immediately stop bombing Gaza. In the 84-page application, South Africa claims that, quote, acts and omissions by Israel are genocidal in character as they are committed with the requisite specific intent to destroy Palestinians in Gaza as part of the broader Palestinian national, racial, and ethnical group, analyzes Marjorie Cohn in Truth Out this week. The application adds that, quote, the conduct of Israel through its state organs, state agents, and other persons and entities acting on its instructions or under its direction, control, or influence in relation to Palestinians in Gaza is in violation of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. Cohen adds that, quote, Israel is mounting a full court press to prevent an ICJ finding that it's committing genocide in Gaza. On January 4th, the Israeli Foreign Ministry instructed its embassies to pressure politicians and diplomats in their host countries to make statements opposing South Africa's case at the ICJ. We're honored to be joined now by Michael Link. Michael served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory from 2016 to 2022 Michael is a professor of law at Western University in London, Ontario, and a non-resident fellow at think tank Dawn, Democracy for the Arab World Now. He joins us to talk about the significance of Israel's genocide at the International Court of Justice. Michael, thank you so much for being with us on the Electronic Intifada's live stream.
A great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start by having you give us a basic outline of what the ICJ is, how it works, and what are the provisional measures that we're hearing about?
Sure. The International Court of Justice is a 15-judge court based in The Hague. It is the highest court in the United Nations system. These judges are elected for 9-year terms, and they come from different parts of the world. There's a geographic representation on the court. The court is sometimes confused with the International Criminal Court, which is also in The Hague. The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction under the Rome Statute of 1998 to look into war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and that's where the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court is anchored. This is the International Court of Justice, and it has several functions. One of them is to determine and adjudicate disputes between member states of the United Nations, and as such, under its charter, it can settle or adjudicate disputes involving the Genocide Convention of 1948. And both Israel and South Africa are members of the Genocide Convention. And what South Africa has done in filing its application with the International Court of Justice at the very end of December is saying that we, South Africa, have a responsibility, a universal responsibility, to try to prevent genocide wherever and whenever it is occurring. And we think it's occurring now in Israel's operations and military operations in Gaza over the last 3 months. Therefore, we're coming to you, International Court of Justice, with an application for provisional measures to try to bring this genocide to a halt immediately, with the prospect of a trial coming several years down the road.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of South Africa bringing this case and the complaint being rooted in apartheid analysis?
Sure. Well, let's keep in mind that genocide is deemed to be the crime of crimes. There's a hierarchy of crimes at the international level. Genocide is right at the very top of that. And we've seen that obviously through our discussions through the 20th century of a range of atrocities that have been accepted as genocide by the international community. And presently, we have another case in front of the International Court of Justice where the Gambia, just like South Africa, the Gambia brought a case against Myanmar alleging genocide and saying we have a responsibility to bring this to an end. And the court in that case in 2020 issued provisional measures, which are the equivalent of injunctions at the American or Canadian court level, asking for this to be frozen, for the acts of genocide to be, or alleged genocide to be brought to an end while the court prepares for a full trial. A full trial will occur with respect to Myanmar around 2025. If this goes ahead with respect to South Africa's application against Israel, I suspect it would be another 3 or 4 years before the full trial would wind up occurring in front of the International Court of Justice. But what South Africa is arguing is that, yes, we're focused on what's going on for the last 3 months, but also, just like Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said, this events here didn't happen in a vacuum. There is a long history before October 7th. And South Africa is raising the issue that we have to understand this in the context of 1947 to 1949, 1967, when the Israeli blockade was brought into Gaza in 2007. All of this has to be contextual background, including the issue of apartheid. When we consider what Israel is doing now, we have to have a wide aperture in understanding Israel's actions, in particular, that Israel is not is a serial defier of international law. There have been numerous resolutions coming from the UN Security Council, for example, with respect to the illegality of Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem, the illegality of the settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the many comments with respect to Israel's human rights violations. So all of this, South Africa is rightly saying, has to be in the mix, has to be in the context, and I'm sure this will be argued by the lawyers for South Africa when the hearings begin tomorrow, Thursday, in The Hague.
And those hearings will be broadcast live, and I'll definitely be watching them. And I know people all over the world will. I have two questions for you.
And we will be watching in Goodman's analysis of these hearings also.
Michael. One is, can we expect the court to take an impartial decision based on the merits of the case, and every serious, impartial person who's looked at the case says it's very strong? I'd like to hear if you agree with that. The second thing is, are these provisional measures enforceable? If the court says at the end of this hearing, or however long it takes, this military action, whether it's genocide or not, must stop pending the court's decision, can they enforce that? What happened in the case of Myanmar? Did the court's ruling provisional measures make any difference?
Thank you. Those are both great questions, Ali. The first question is you asked goes to, is this an impartial court? And the answer is yes. This is an impartial court, and it has delivered important rulings on the side of an expansive liberal view of human rights and international law in the recent past. Consider 2004, 20 years ago, there was an advisory opinion that Palestine urged the General Assembly to ask of the International Court of Justice on the legality of the wall that Israel was and is still constructing through the occupied West Bank. And the court issued a very strong ruling in that case that the location of the wall was illegal. It also said that the settlements are illegal, and it also made comments with respect to the illegal annexation of East Jerusalem. And more recently, the court issued an important decision with respect to the Chagos Islands, a small string of islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean that the United Kingdom separated from Mauritius at the time of Mauritius' independence 60 years ago. And the International Court of Justice, in its ruling several years ago, said that was wrong, that was a violation of international law, and it's forced the United Kingdom to negotiate with Mauritius over the return of the islands to Mauritian sovereignty. So I think we all should be hopeful and expect that the court will rule as judges will in an impartial fashion based on the law and the facts in front of it. The second question, Ali, that you've mentioned is, if the court does wind up issuing provisional measures with respect to what South Africa is asking, are these enforceable? The answer is no in the court of law, yes, hopefully in the court of public opinion. There is no, in international law, there is no separate army or police to enforce these orders. And we know that from a long history with respect to Israel's non-compliance with hundreds of UN resolutions, and indeed with the order that the court issued 20 years ago on the legality or the illegality of the wall. But let's keep in mind this. International law will not liberate Palestine in the end. That's going to have to be a political task between the international civil society, pushing the international community to work with Palestinians fighting against the occupation and against the denial of their rights. But international law, combined with international resolve, can be a very important tool. And for a country to have an allegation of genocide, even provisionally accepted by an important court like the ICJ, would do great political damage to it. So I guess we have to see this as you would want to see this, in the realm of politics, in the realm of activism and civil society, as to what the court may wind up delivering. But I want to add just one other thing very quickly. No good lawyer would ever want to say any case which is being contested is a slam dunk. Israel will have all of Friday to make arguments. And I suspect the arguments they will make will be twofold. One, they'll argue that October 7th was a human rights catastrophe, that it was an atrocity. And I'm sure they'll be showing slides or videos to the court with respect to what they said happened on October 7th. And therefore, flowing from that, Israel will be arguing self-defense. They'll say that everything they've done is in self-defense after what arose on October 7th, and everything they've done since has been within the strict bounds of international law. Now, I'm curious to see what kind of facts they're going to marshal with respect to self-defense, with regards to how they've conducted the war, in claiming that it's not genocidal, it's not even war crimes or crimes against humanity. That's a pretty tall order for Israel to want to make. But we have to keep in mind that there's going to be two arguments, two diametrically opposed arguments made to the court, and this may influence what the court winds up doing. The court could do three things. It could do nothing with respect to the request for provisional measures. I highly doubt that's what they will do. It could make a provisional measures order tailored to exactly what South Africa is asking for, an end to the conflict, immediate end and a ceasefire, and to withdraw all of its troops from that, and to allow humanitarian aid to enter in full into the Gaza Strip. The third option is that they could issue a both-sidism provisional measure. One, accepting some or all of what South Africa said, but also directing an order against Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups in Gaza, telling them that they should not be committing genocide as well. So it's up, it's up in the air as to what the court will wind up doing. It'll either be number 2 or number 3, I suspect. And I'm saying that as a lawyer that tries to read and understand how this court winds up thinking.
Michael, go ahead, Nora.
Okay, that's very interesting background and evidence. And we know they had the case this week, and we are going to hear more about it from Amy Goodman. But we're going now to our next topic, which is the B'Tselem report on Israel's starving Gaza. 93% of the population in Gaza, some 2.8 million people, were suffering from acute food insecurity at phase 3 or higher, with over 15%, around 378,000 people already at phase 5. The report also forecasts that by February 7th, the entire population of the Gaza Strip will reach phase 3 or worse. So we're going to look at this article by B'Tselem on how Israel is starving Gaza. And B'Tselem, in case you don't know, is an Israeli group for human rights in Israel. They have been very active in peace negotiations and protection of Palestinian rights. Right now, they're not very popular in Israel. Okay, so let's read the actual report, Israel's starving Gaza. Everyone in Gaza is going hungry. About 2.2 million people are surviving day by day on almost nothing, routinely going without meals. The desperate search for food is relentless, and these days unsuccessful. We have some new Zoom, Norby, welcome Zoom. And we have people on Facebook that side. Thank you for joining. The desperate search for food is relentless and these days unsuccessful, leaving the entire population, including babies, children, pregnant and nursing women, and the elderly hungry. The Gaza Strip was already at the throes of humanitarian crisis before the war, mainly due to Israel's 17-year blockade. About 80% of the population relied on humanitarian aid. Some 44% of households were food insecure, and another 16 were at the risk of food insecurity. Given this starting point, it's clear why Gaza plummeted into a full-blown catastrophe so quickly. So B'Tselem is acknowledging the history. And this is important because many people have reminded the world that October 7th the problems of October 7th did not start on October 7th. That Israel's policy, genocidal policies against Gaza and against the Palestinians started way before. And so the whole background on why this food insecurity occurred so quickly is important to know, that it's derived from the Israeli blockade of 17 years. On 21st of December 2023, the Integrated Food Security Phase called IPC from the Famine Review Committee, FRC, published a report on the situation in Gaza. This is in December. The FRC, which consists of independent experts, uses the internationally accepted classification of food insecurity levels, the most severe being phase 5, catastrophic famine. According to this method, urgent interventions is needed as of phase 3, which is crisis or worse, in order to protect the population. So we saw the mention of the phases in the video that we saw. The FRC report is based on information collected in Gaza Strip. Hi, John. Welcome, John. Nice to see you. The FRC report is based on information collected in the Gaza Strip from the 24th of November to 7th December 2023. The committee found that during this time, in 4 of 5 households in northern Gaza and in half of IDP households to the south, residents went days without any food and many skipped meals to feed their children. And if we forget what IDP was, that means in people who are insecure of food. Okay. Residents, the committee found that during this time in 4 of the 5 households in northern Gaza and half of the IDP households in the south, residents went days without any food and many skipped meals to feed their children. About 93% of the population in Gaza, some 2.8 million people, were suffering from acute food insecurity at phase at phase 5. Remember, phase 5 is catastrophic famine. The report also forecasts that by 7th of February 2024, in a few weeks, the entire population of the Gaza Strip will reach phase 3 or even worse. At least 1 in 4 residents, more than 500,000 people, is expected to be at phase 5, facing extreme food shortages, hunger, and exhaustion. According to the report, if current conditions persist, there is a significant risk that famine will be declared throughout the entire Gaza Strip within 6 months. Such a declaration is made when 20% of households reach phase 5, which is catastrophic famine. When 30% of the children suffer from severe malnutrition, and when 2 adults and 4 children out of 10,000 die of hunger every day. And we discussed the effect of this starvation and malnutrition on children, on their development of their brains, of their bodies, severe consequences, most of which are irreversible. We discussed that a few weeks ago. So this is really, really awful. Similarly, a UNICEF survey from 26 December last year found that an increasing number of children are not receiving their basic nutritional needs. About 90% of children under age 2 in Gaza consume food from 2 or fewer food groups. In a survey conducted 2 weeks earlier, the figure was 80%. The nutrition of pregnant and nursing women has also been severely compromised, with 25% consuming only 1 type of food and almost 65% only 2 types. This reality is not a byproduct of war, but a direct result of Israel's declared policy. And remember, this is an Israeli group that's writing this report. A direct result of Israel's declared policy. Residents now depend entirely on food supplies from outside Gaza, as they can no longer produce almost any food themselves. Most cultivated fields have been destroyed, and accessing open areas during the war is dangerous in any case. Bakeries, factories, and food warehouses have been bombed or shut down due to lack of basic supplies, fuel, and electricity. Stockpiles in private homes, stores, and warehouses have long since run out in these conditions. The family and social support networks that helped residents at the beginning of the war collapsed too. Yet Israel is deliberately denying the entry of enough food into Gaza to meet the population needs. Only a fraction of the amount of food entering before the war is allowed in, with limitation on the types of goods, how they are brought in, and how they are distributed within Gaza. For example, almost all goods enter through the Rafah crossing, a passenger crossing that is not equipped for massive commercial transport. It's actually a very narrow gate to get through, a narrow street, narrow road. It limits the number of truckloads getting through and creates a bottleneck. Although Israel recently allowed trucks in through the Kerem Shalom crossing too, which is designed for commercial transports, but this was merely a token addition that has failed to alleviate the hardship. Additionally, Israel forces aid organizations to purchase food from Egypt and prevents them from buying it in Israel, which would allow for a more efficient and rapid transfer of goods. Israel also prohibits the private sector in Gaza from purchasing food, which could significantly increase supplies. Aid organizations are struggling to operate under current conditions, and most of the limited aid allowed in remains in Rafah, instead of reaching residents through the Strip. Martin Griffiths, the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, listed several reasons why aid cannot be efficiently distributed. Among other things, he noted that trucks are inspected several times before Israel allows them into Gaza. And even then, long lines form due to the conditions at Rafah crossing. The little food that does get in is very difficult to distribute due to the constant bombings, destroyed roads, frequent communication blackouts, and shelters overflowing with hundreds of thousands of IDPs crowded into smaller and smaller areas. Welcome, Shadab, on Facebook Live. Israel can, if it so chooses, change the reality. The images of children begging for food, people waiting in long lines for paltry handouts, and hungry residents charging at aid trucks are already inconceivable. The horror is growing by the minute, and the danger of famine is real. Still, Israel persists in its policy. Changing this policy is not just a moral obligation. Allowing food into the Gaza Strip is not an act of kindness, but a positive obligation under international humanitarian law. Starvation as a method of warfare is prohibited. And when a civilian population lacks what it needs to survive, parties to the conflict have a positive obligation to allow rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid, including food. These two rules are considered customary law, and violating them constitutes a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. God bless B'Tselem, God bless these Israelis sticking their neck out and publishing this report. Israel is starving Gaza. So it shows that there are many Israelis who are outraged. And we're going to see now a video with an interview with an Israeli talking about some of these issues, how the IDF is using hunger as a weapon of war. And we'll see her comments on
This is
that.
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Several United Nations agencies, including the World Food Program, say Israel's bombardment of Gaza could lead to a famine throughout the entire Gaza Strip within 6 months unless immediate action is taken. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians are now in Rafah, and many are waiting in line for hours for small amounts of food as aid agencies struggle to meet the demand. I came here to get food. I've been here since 9 a.m. just to get a plateful of food because the situation is very difficult. We are from Gaza City and we came to Rafah. The people of Rafah received us and welcomed us, but the numbers are large and the situation is very difficult. There is no money to buy food and there is no flour. We have no money to buy anything at home. There is no gas or anything that would help us to cook even a plate of lentils. We come here to get this plate of food, and it is not enough. This comes as hundreds of trucks trying to bring aid to Gaza are backed up for miles in Egypt at the Rafah border crossing and have been forced to wait for weeks to enter. On Tuesday, British Foreign Secretary David Cameron urged Israel to lift barriers on delivering humanitarian aid into Gaza, citing, quote, real widespread hunger. Cameron was cross-examined by the Scottish MP Brendan O'Hara. A few minutes ago, and also a reply to the chair, you said, and I quote, one of the things we'd like the Israelis to do is switch the water back on. Now, that says that they turned it off. It says that you recognise they have the power to turn it on. Therefore, isn't turning water off and having the ability to turn it back on, but choosing not to, isn't that a breach of international humanitarian law? It's just something they ought to do, in my opinion.
They're nuts.
I think human beings say we don't cut people's water supply. I'm asking Foreign Secretary, what is a very point of international humanitarian law? If people have the power to turn the water back on that they turn off, surely that is a flagrant breach of international humanitarian law.
Well, I'm not a lawyer. My view is they ought to switch it on because the north of Gaza, the conflict is now effectively over there. And so getting more water and power into northern Gaza would be a very good thing to do. You don't have to be a lawyer to make a judgment about that. You just have to be a human being. Last month, the UN Security Council passed a resolution to immediately increase aid deliveries in Gaza, and Human Rights Watch accused Israel of using starvation as a method of warfare, which violates international humanitarian law. Well, for more, we're going to Tel Aviv. We're joined by Sarit Mikhaeli, international advocacy lead for the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, which has just published a new report, Israel is Starving Gaza, that says starvation is, quote, not a byproduct of war, but a direct result of Israel's declared policy. Sarit, welcome to Democracy Now! Lay out exactly what you found, what you feel can be done about it.
Well, in very basic terms, almost everyone in Gaza is hungry almost all of the time. 2.3 million people are surviving mostly on sometimes one meal a day, people skipping meals in order to feed their children, people busy constantly looking for the next meal, for the next source of food for them and their families and children. And all of this is happening in a place that is pretty much an hour's drive from here, right? Where there's supplying humanitarian assistance and food and all the necessities like water and other things that people rely on should not be a difficult problem. We're not talking about some sort of remote region internationally. We're talking about an area that is accessible, where the things that impede this provision of food for people who are starving is a declared policy by Israel. The fact that Israel isn't allowing enough trucks in, the fact that Israel isn't providing the ability, the logistical infrastructure to actually drive this food into Gaza in places where it's possible to do, and many other decisions.
And Netanyhu.
This, that are making it, making the amount of assistance that is coming into Gaza simply a fraction of what the population needs. And Amy, you quoted the international experts on this issue. Within a month, they expect almost all of the residents of the Gaza Strip to be up to what is phase 3 of this scale of horror of hunger. And this is simply unacceptable when it's very clearly preventable. And the things that was said in the British Parliament by Minister Cameron are very clearly a clarification that this is the result of Israeli policies and actions. This is not just some sort of coincidence or just some unfortunate byproduct of war.
Well, Sarit, I want to ask you, how is Israel controlling the food supply, especially in Rafah, where Rafah leads into Egypt? So how exactly does it manage to continue to prevent trucks from getting in?
So let's even look at the past situation. I mean, Gaza was on the brink of collapse even before this war began with the horrific October 7th attack by Hamas against Israelis, right? So this has been a situation of food insecurity since the beginning of the Israeli blockade on Gaza, almost 17 years ago. But the Israeli decisions to cut off electricity, to cut off the water supply that Israel sells Gaza, to not allow all of the movement of the international humanitarian provision of supplies, those decisions made it almost impossible from the start for bakeries to operate and provide for the people. And now, so the collapse was very quick and based on a very long period of deprivation. But now the issue really is that there needs to be hundreds of trucks entering Gaza every day, and just a fraction of that is entering. This is happening because Gaza, the Rafah crossing is just not equipped for the movement of goods. Goods should be entering Gaza through other border crossings that are generally with Israel, not with Egypt. Israel is also prohibiting the provision of food purchased on the Israeli market. So the aid agencies have to bring it from Egypt, which is even more difficult. Plus, there are also many restrictions on the ability to distribute it once it actually gets into the Gaza Strip. And then we see these awful images of desperate people charging these provision convoys that are coming in and taking what they can because they are simply so desperate and the food isn't reaching some areas of Gaza. So you have a situation where in some areas of Gaza, things are only just bad, whereas in others, things are just absolutely atrocious. And this is not a very large area. So certainly, and I think it's recognized now by the international community, the Israeli government is at fault, is responsible for this. And this should lead to immediate international action, not simply conversations with Israeli policymakers, but actually clear clarifications that Israel is violating both its legal obligations, i.e., this is a war crime, and also that this is simply an immoral way to treat a civilian population.
After a visit to the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza, U.S. Democratic Senators Jeff Merkley and Chris Van Hollen blasted the Israeli process for screening the aid. Senator Van Hollen spoke to CBS Face the Nation. This is what he said.
Many items that should be allowed to go into Gaza, water sort of filtration systems, other systems like that, were in a warehouse of rejected items that we visited. While we were there, we saw a truck turned away that had a big box from UNICEF, which is, of course, the UN organization that helps children. It was a unit to help with water desalinization. It was rejected. And when one item on a truck is rejected, the entire truck is rejected. The other big issue is within Gaza, the so-called deconfliction process, which is just a fancy name for those who are providing humanitarian assistance to have the confidence that they can deliver it without being killed.
If you can talk more about this, Sarit. Again, the Senator Van Hollen is the one who has also called for release of more information about the Israeli sniper who murdered Shireen Abu Akleh on May 11th, 2022 in Jenin in the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Well, we certainly appreciate the leadership that Senator Van Hollen and actually Senator Merkley are showing on this issue. And it is absolutely crucial that U.S. lawmakers, both from the more progressive part of the Democratic Party, but also from the mainstream security-oriented, kind of a more established part of the Democratic Party, are engaging with President Biden to demand action on this issue. Simply an unconscionable situation that is unfolding in front of us. Now, I'd like to refer to the second part of Senator Holland's discussion of the dangers inside of Gaza. Yes, absolutely. There's been another update by the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, discussing an additional rejection by the Israeli authorities of another attempt to coordinate the transfer of medical goods into hospitals in the northern Gaza Strip. This was only the day before yesterday, apparently. So we're seeing that there are simply so many difficulties in trying to bring the aid, deliver the aid with safety for the aid provided, obviously, in this area that is bombed. And this brings us to the essential issue, which is that there needs to be a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. There needs to be a halt to Israeli airstrikes and bombardments in order for this food and aid and assistance, and not only food, medical supplies and other necessities have to be provided. And this is the continuation of the hostilities is making this provision far too dangerous and impossible currently. This is one other reason why we need this to stop. B'Tselem has called for a ceasefire, but of course, the most important reason for this to stop is to stop the killing of civilians, of women and children and human beings in the Gaza Strip in a way that absolutely is disproportionate to what is facing Israel right now, and to the policies of basically airstrikes, bombing residential homes. All of this is one, and the huge death toll, 23,000 Gazans and counting as a result, that can only be described as the revenge attack after the horrific death toll that Israelis have suffered. But, we simply cannot accept, it's certainly not moral and it's certainly not legal that we inflict such a degree of suffering on Gazans, we Israelis, regardless of how much we have suffered and how horrific we have been affected by this. There is simply no justification for the continuation of this Israeli attack on Gaza, and it has to stop. There has to be a ceasefire.
Sari, I wanted to ask you, you're talking to us from Tel Aviv. How aware are Israelis of the catastrophic situation so close to where most of them live? And is there any significant portion of the population that cares?
Well, unfortunately, Juan, the situation is very, very depressing and just painful when we look at the responses of many Israelis, possibly even the majority of Israelis, to what we see now in Gaza. I think the majority of Israelis still support what we are doing there. There is very little protest or very little rejection of the methods that Israel is employing in its attack against the civilian population of Gaza. The Israeli media doesn't really broadcast much information about the suffering of Gazans, the devastation, the utter devastation of infrastructure, and the loss of homes, and the human beings are being killed on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. But one of the saddest aspects of this is that even when people are aware of it, there are so many politicians and influencers and people who are simply rejecting any need to respect the humanity of people in Gaza. And unfortunately, some of the people who are aware of the huge price, the horrific toll that Gazans are paying, are not, are simply okay with it. And this is one of the most depressing aspects of what is going on now in terms of the total dehumanization of Gazans among many people in Israel. I should mention there are Israelis who are opposed to this situation. There are Israelis who are calling to recognize the humanity of Gazans, but we are in the minority, unfortunately.
Yeah, we have less than a minute left, but I wanted to ask you quickly. You've also been monitoring the violence in the West Bank that has gotten far less attention. Could you talk about what you chronicled?
Absolutely, yes. So since October 7th, there's also been a massive increase in the violence by Israeli soldiers and also security forces and Israeli settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank. It has led to a really large number of Palestinians killed by soldiers and by Israeli settlers. It has led to takeovers of land by settlers, to the removal, to the forcible transfer of Palestinian herding communities from very large parts of the West Bank. It's led to the total destruction of the olive harvest, for example. It's a coordinated a campaign by settlers to damage the Palestinian economy. And all of these things are happening with very little international attention. And again, this has got to end. There has to be a recognition of what is going on throughout the West Bank, of Israeli actions there, and how, and as we call when it comes to the situation in the Gaza Strip, there has to be international action to hold Israeli policymakers accountable for their decisions that have led to these horrific results.
Okay, so that was very interesting. Thank God for Amy Goodman. We're going to stop now. I'm going to make a few comments about the International Court because it's actually time for us. We have a few minutes before we end. What I wanted to bring up is that the International Court, the presentation by South Africa was excellent. If any of you saw it, but it was not easy to find out how it was covered in the United States. What really angered me is that the International Court and the case presented by South Africa was pretty much ignored in the American media, except for Amy Goodman. She covered it. But if you went to any of the mainstream CNN, MSNBC, ABC, any of the mainstream news programs, all they talked about was Trump. And they never mentioned anything about the South African case. However, that was on Thursday. And I was able to Google and watch the arguments, which were quite brilliant. However, Friday, Israel made its defense and it was all over the media. So talk about a lack of balance in the media. Pro-Israel is just shocking. I don't know why I still get shocked by this, but it's still shocking and depressing. As the woman Sarit said in Israel, that this situation is very depressing for all of us. And I opened the program, I don't know, maybe everybody didn't hear, but now there's a campaign against me in the building I live in, calling me an anti-Semite and actually accusing me of having posted a Nazi swastika. But then the ex-president of the Residents' Council, who's kind of a political enemy of mine, he has been telling people that the rumors going around that he told me to take it down and I took it down. So that's why the swastika is not up anymore. This is a blatant lie. I have never posted a swastika. And I'd like, for point of clarification, that my children are half Jewish. My ex-husband was Jewish. And on my mother's Italian side, we had Catholic weddings with kosher tables because we were mixed. And I think that actually my great-great-grandmother was Jewish when they immigrated from Italy. So I guess I can then be called a self-hating Jew as well as an anti-Semite. But I've decided actually from this event, which has been very upsetting to me to find, I just found out about it before this program, that it has inspired me. You know, what doesn't kill you makes you strong. And now I'm inspired to write a book on why Israel is anti-Semitic. Because the current Israeli government violates all Jewish law and the historic tradition of compassionate Jewish ethics. And I'm going to try to collaborate with, some people who are much more knowledgeable about me. I mean, I've done some scholarship in Jewish history and Jewish ethics and my own research and writing, but now I'm dedicated. So if anybody knows anything, any source of information on this topic, how I can write about, and then I'll do a program on how Israel is anti-Semitic, probably the most dangerous anti-Semitic nation in the world. So, and also the Palestinians are Semites, hello. And probably most of the Palestinians are the descendants of the ancient Jews who never left Palestine. So this is going to be my next project, my next venture. And if you have any sources of any information on the tradition of humane ethics in Judaism that would be contrary to the behavior of this current fascist Israeli government, I would very much appreciate your help and assistance on it. So we just have to keep our thoughts positive. I believe in the power of our thoughts and the power of prayer, the power of positive thinking, that we have to believe in peace. No matter how horrible this situation is, we have to fight all the negative energies by projecting thoughts of peace and love and harmony, that it is going to be possible to resolve this, that human beings are basically good when they're not being bad. So let's try to think positively, send positive thoughts. And tomorrow on Martin Luther King Day, there's a big rally for Palestine in conjunction with the memorial for Martin Luther King at Bryant Park, 42nd Street by I think it's between 6th and 7th Avenue or 5th and 6th Avenue. And if you're interested in finding out more information, contact me. And there's also plenty of stuff online. So John, it's so great to see you. I hope you're doing well. How are you, and what's your response to all of this that's going on?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm very interested in the Shoresh Socioeconomic Policy Research Institute in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
Daniel Ben David has his doctorate in economics from the University of Chicago, is the founder and chief executive officer. He has been publishing material regarding the educational system in Israel, and particularly the failure of the system to educate large numbers of youngsters who are members of families of the far right in Israel, and of course members of the coalition of the Israeli government at present. And he is sounding the alarm that Israel is doomed to be a third world in reverse economy and society. If the Israeli government is doing to their own children, in terms of an adequate future, if the Israeli government is doing to its own children what it's doing, in effect, from Ben David's research, then in the real sense, it's not surprising that they're, in effect, making believe that the Palestinian children aren't there.
Yeah.
And they're blind to their own.
Right. Yeah.
Much less also to Palestinian children.
This has been an issue for several years. When I was in Israel about, probably 8 years ago, some of my Israeli friends were complaining about the deterioration of Israeli education. And they blamed a lot of it on the migration of to Israel from people from Eastern Europe who were the old Soviet Union, who didn't understand anything about what civil rights were or human values, and they had
Well,
a very different approach to education.
in
And
New York, in the spring of 2023, we had the press ablaze with stories about yeshivas here in the city providing inadequate education for the future of their students. In a real sense, this is a problem within, it seems to me, within the total Jewish community,
right,
wherever.
yeah,
But it's largely Haredi community that is having the increase in Jewish youngsters in that population.
This is a real split between the Ashkenazi tradition of refugees from Germany, England, France, who valued education, who produced brilliant intellectuals in Europe and in America, because of the value of secular education, basically. And Jews have been at the forefront of that. And now in Israel, that's all being undermined.
That's correct.
Real diminishment, absolutely.
That's correct. Well, if it's happening to Israel, then the selective blindness regarding Palestinian children is understandable.
Right, exactly. Well, I would appreciate if you could send me the link, John, maybe in a messenger or Facebook or email of the Research Institute, because perhaps I could contact them and they may be able to direct me to some people who would have expertise in this area, because I know. And then, of course, you have the Hasidim groups that are always in the front of the Palestinian protests, who believe Israel is, not a Jewish state, that they are against Israel. And I will get in touch with some of them also. But they'll give me the religious, the views on it. But I like some secular understanding of the tradition of compassion and humanity in Jewish ethics. And I have researched this in terms of the treatment of jailed children. I wrote an article several years ago about, and I looked up in Jewish law the rules for treating of children, and putting them in jail was definitely not allowed. So anyhow, we just have to, build the kingdom one block at a time. We may not live to see the results, but we just have to keep pushing for right. And it's so good to see you, John. And and Happy New Year. Best wishes, Norby and John, for New Year. Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you, everybody on Facebook Live. Very happy you were able to join. And I'll talk to you, see you next week. Ma salama.